Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Ryan Meading. I am the CIO here at Rackspace. I've been here 3 years and am responsible for both the technology and the engineering services teams within the Rack. Brandon?
And my name is Brandon Elliott, CTO for the digital group here at Rackspace. I've been here for almost 3 years, and digital here at Rackspace, as we'll briefly talk about it in a little bit, focuses on commerce and content areas.
Well, we're really excited to have you, and we want to just take some time to talk about the business of IT transformation. What are some of the driving factors, some of the challenges, and some considerations for you to have. I also, just from an administrative perspective, if you have questions while we're going through this, please ask them through the chat box, and we have allocated some time at the end to make sure that we answer your questions. So, again, with no further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. When we really think about IT transformation or the business of it, we kind of break it into 3 buckets. There's the business, the digital, and the IT. And if we go to the next slide, what we'll see here is kind of we'll go into the detail here of a business. And Brandon, I know you have some great examples. Why don't you walk us through the business transformation and an example, and then we can cover the rest.
Yeah, so I think it was, probably more common now to kind of share, assets when you're doing merchandising and marketing. But if you remember, especially, I worked for a company for 9 years, and I think back in 2007, we had this notion of merchandisers, and it was in-store merchandisers for brick and mortar, right, which did lawn and garden, appliances, electronics, things like that. And then we had a separate team that did online merchandising, and the two actually rarely talked. And so we had print material going out for local marketing that was the in-store goods, and then we had material going out online for via our banners and website and whatnot. That was a completely different segment of product, and sometimes a little bit mixed. So I think a good example here of business transformation would be, if you haven't already, get to the point where your merchandisers are singing off the same sheet of paper, right? That your advertising team is using the same asset repository. That everybody is treating the customer's experience as one journey, not as online versus brick and mortar. And I think we'll get some examples later on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The next one is what we're calling digital transformation. When I refer to digital, and as we talk through it, you're going to understand this is really the application layer. And what we're seeing here at the Rack is the lines are blurring very quickly between the business and the IT organizations, particularly how we partner at the application layer. We're starting to transform in our roles of how we become more of a consultative role to some of the SaaS providers, but at the same time, we're also being asked to be some of the leaders in helping build out those applications to meet those business requirements. And the last one that we have is the IT transformation itself, and that's really the reassessment and overhaul of the infrastructure layer altogether. And what we are seeing here at the Rack is that we are really moving into a multi-cloud world. It's not one infrastructure meets all. And the value that each of these public clouds provide are different based on the business needs and demands. And what we're seeing is you can't just have a dedicated gear or AWS meets all your needs. As you really expand at the enterprise level, or even in the small business, you're finding that particular clouds better serve the business. And the question there is, how do we best pick those and select those to utilize their capabilities to the best of the company or for the Rack in our case.
Yeah, we saw a trend, I think, Ryan, a couple of years ago where everybody defined success as being able to move all your workloads to public cloud as fast as possible. Then you kind of look around and a lot of people realize that it doesn't necessarily always save money. In fact, sometimes it can be quite the opposite with bandwidth costs and backups and having to kind of provide an HA, a whole different infrastructure architecture for public cloud versus private cloud. I think the last, I would say a good 6 to almost 12 months, we've started to see, certainly not a reverse trend. Public cloud is definitely a fit for a lot of applications, but we've seen kind of a maturity, I would say, where a lot of customers are looking at the workload, working with a company like a Rackspace or another partner, and identifying a 3-year strategy. Frankly, it took 10 years to get these applications or longer where they are today. It's going to take longer than a year to move them. And sometimes it's not worth moving. And oftentimes, some of those workloads, particularly legacy applications that aren't cloud native, which we'll kind of discuss in a minute, really should probably stay in private cloud. So there's pros and cons, and I think we'll get some of the details in a minute.
That's right. Well, I mean, really the intent here is to explain kind of what an IT transformation can do. I can tell you, and from a CIO lens here at the Rack, this is something that's very real that I'm going through right now. We are going through this transformation. We're evolving how we handle our architecture, how we handle the hardware, the storage, all of those components. But at the same time, we're finding that we have to really closely partner with the business, because as we're transforming, we just don't want to take what we were doing before and just put it on new systems and do the same thing, right? And how do you make sure that you're not bending to the old ways of way your company is doing things, but actually moving into a best practice new model? And that takes some conviction, that takes some automation, and quite frankly, it's put some gray hairs on my head. But at the same time, the outcome is that you're operating faster, quicker, and more efficient. And then the other part, from at least the IT lens that I'm starting to see, is the IT function itself is actually being called to the front table now. We are sitting at the table. We are helping drive this, because we're no longer from a reactive stance. We're actually being proactive in how we're driving change within the Rack. And I'm sure we have examples where we're doing that same thing for our customers.
Yeah, we do actually. I think one dates back about a year and a half now. We've got 80 plus customers using a product called Adobe Experience Manager, right? It powers, particularly in the automotive industry, but also, really a lot of verticals, powers very immersive, rich experiences, right? Think like a luxury automotive manufacturer, right? And trying to tailor to identify if the person that's shopping on the site right now is more of a $50,000 budget or $200,000 budget. And those are very different experiences. And so you use some of these richer applications. That's an example of an application that even Adobe will tell you it was born well before cloud. It came out of a company called Dave Software, very strong, but depends on things like a SAN being present, so the storage does not go down. Well, cloud is anything but that. And it took us, we are right at 40,000 hours now of engineering, and we've got a great group of customers that we've finally been able to kind of port that application and through about a year and a half worth of effort, get it to be cloud friendly, if you will. And so we had to think about things like, okay, well, we used to just store a couple terabytes, 20, 40, 50, whatever, over here on the SAN, and we called it done. In cloud, it goes away. How do we deal with recovery? How do we make sure that, if you've got an automotive, a luxury brand, for example, 10, 15 minutes of downtime is critical, especially during key times. And so it really requires a lot of kind of thinking about it, but we were able to basically re-architect not only the underlying infrastructure and get it to work with the application, but frankly, well over half of those hours we're actually modifying the application itself, because there just comes a point where you can't emulate what you do in a private cloud environment.
That's right. Exactly. So that's kind of the high level of how we're framing up the three kind of forms of transformation, and now we want to kind of get into kind of how we solve these and some of the business challenges associated to that. And the first one that we want to talk about is just staying competitive. And we're going to sit on this in the next few for quite a bit and just spend some time on it. But, from when I talk with customers or other CIOs, we have the pressure of trying to figure out, hey, how do we leverage this cloud? Because we want to stay competitive, we want to be engaged, we want to have a seat at that table, but yet we've still got to run things. And how do we figure out what's the right thing to move to the cloud in a safe environment? Because at the end of the day, if you outsource it or use a partner, or you go to AWS, you're still held accountable if something happens outside of that. And so how do you make sure that you have the controls in place to be successful, but at the same time you are able to then go spend your time helping enable the business? Because that line between the groups is blurring, right? And how do we actually go get up front and start growing the business? And I can give you a couple examples here where right now we are really focusing on how to ensure that our technology stack is as efficient as possible, so that our engineers have the capability to build quicker and get out solves and automation to our customers and internally, so that we can reduce costs and savings that we can actually give back to the business for growing it. And then at the same time, we're finding that we're being invited to the table to help solve those problems. And I can tell you that's very inspiring from an IT lens to actually be a part of that, growing the business and being the enabler that helps do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to kind of, obviously think ahead a little bit, but some of the work laying the foundation isn't very glorious, right? You've got a
That's right.
federated login, like, okay, let's do this billing.
Yep.
How long do we spend on billing around here, right? But it's necessary to set the groundwork, because particularly in the multi-cloud world where, for right now, maybe we're working on an AWS drive, but then we're adding Azure. We recently added Google. How do you make sure that all the compliance regimen that we have to go through and the certifications that we have to kind of go through annually, we want to simplify it as much as possible and reuse. You don't want to, basically go get certified 3 times a year.
That's right. That's right. Another example is just on the increasing competitiveness, right? And so it's being able to double down and move faster, and it's making. And this is an exercise that we're going through right now. We have, one of the great benefits of Rackspace is we have had just phenomenal growth over and over, and I'm sure a lot of you and your companies have also seen that same growth. And with that growth, though, you do a lot of pivots and turns and technical that just starts to form, and then all of a sudden you're just not as fast getting to that finish line because you got to connect all these dots. And one of the things that we're really focusing on as part of our IT transformation and the advantages is actually starting to create that service layer. In which we're API enabled, playbook enabled. So now we are getting out of the way of the businesses. So we are enabling the capability. The businesses will have their playbook and will be able to connect to APIs or particular services or source data to either pull information to make them more competitive and understand what they need to do. But we remove the friction of getting stuck in a queue and having to wait for 6 months to 9 years for something to develop. And our focus is actually now making our services and our options feature rich that enables more things. And a great example of that is the things that are kind of common ground across other them: identity, billing, the portals. How can we enable those that as a business or as a group wants to get started up, how can they quickly go and pick the platform of choice for them? So if it's a FOSS or AWS solution or a Google solution or even our bare metal or VMware solution, they can go faster. And by removing that friction, I think you're able to just get to either assessing and realizing did you do the right thing or not, or pivot, or you can get those examples back in so you can iterate and learn at a much faster pace.
Yeah, I think an example of this, probably for many on the phone, is going to be, it used to be that you go to IT and you put in your request and you wait 2 to 4 weeks, and then IT got this bad rap for A, being a call center, B, taking forever, because everybody is special, right? Everybody wants to jump to the front of the line. I think one of the things the cloud has enabled is for IT departments to work with the business owners to set the policies and to allow the business owners to go and build their own thing. So an example of that is, how do you preset spending budgets? How do you enable the business owner, business user, or their customers to log in and identify to tag what the expense is related to? Is it development? Is it production? What are you doing? Hopefully you still go to the IT department for production, but at least for development, you should be able, hopefully, using public clouds to enable your business partners to log in one time, go off to the races, get out of the way, let them innovate, let them move faster. That's the whole point of cloud, and still control really the private, the public production releases that really require so much authentication and security.
That's right. I want to tease that out just a little because. And for those in the IT world, I think hopefully you can relate to my comment here, but I think there's a difference here from part of the IT transformation of building the APIs and services. The point of that is so that it's built once and it's built right? Because I think the shadow IT concept or the forming of shadow IT, actually I think a lot of reasons that the organizations and teams support is because it gives you the sense of going faster, but when you really think about it, you're not, because you may have built it for that particular purpose or that mission, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't feed into the larger IT system, you're going to finally reach a point of scale or maintenance, or all of a sudden the business is now spending most of their money maintaining a system that's not in generating the value add. So it then does need to be moved back over to IT. And I think that's one of the differences of where, from an IT lens, the platforms actually make us more competitive. And I compare it very similar to like a go-kart and an airplane, right? A go-kart, is close to the ground, you go fast. It feels like you're going fast, but you're really going only like 30 miles per hour, right? Where an airplane, you're going wicked fast, but it feels like you're going slow, right? And I think if we take the time to go put the governing and controls in place from an IT lens so that we actually are truly moving faster. I mean, I can get coast to coast on an airplane, even stopping in every single city way faster than a go-kart will ever get me there, right? And so it's really how do we make sure we put the framework up front and be successful, but then make sure that those services have features and scale so that the businesses can do exactly what you just said, Brandon, and go crazy and innovate on their own.
Yeah, and it's important to call out that you don't necessarily have to build it from scratch, right? It's been built now, so find a partner on the software side and or on the managed cloud side that maybe is pre-built most of it for you and allows you to sort of extend that.
That's right. Excellent. Let's go into fostering innovation. I think there's a couple things I think from a Rackspace lens I'd love to provide here on. The first one is that there are old models that slow down innovation. The rate of technology changing, man, I don't know about you, but it's just insane. And part of it for me has been, how do I really find what is the differentiator for me and my business? Like, what are the things that are truly differentiating that we will actually invest and put money in? And the things that are not, I can't compete with a company who's putting 100 or 1,000 resources and focusing on billing, for example, or ticketing or service. It makes no sense for me as a leader to go invest that and run that when this other group is dedicated to that and they're becoming, and they're putting all the money and resources to it, right? Versus 5 engineers trying to do the same thing on my side. And so it's really been, how do we start fostering that window of innovation of looking at the world a little differently? What are those true differentiators for us? And then with that comes a skill set transformation. We have, we're adding, like I have a product now, a product organization for IT. And, it's funny, I do a lot of interviews and they're all, well, I'm not used to having an IT product person or being applied for it. But really that's what it is. It's like, how do we start treating these projects that we were doing in the past to actually be truly products so that we are thinking about it long term. We are putting a real strategy behind how we want to do data, how we want to do ticketing, how we want to innovate identity and those types of functions.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, you hit on something was, when do you build it? When do you specialize versus, does it make a difference? Does it move the needle for your business? And we see this a lot, particularly with some of our partners, mainly on the agency side, where we're participating with them for scoping out a new project. And that's going to include everything that's related to commerce, typically for us. It's going to be your back office as well as obviously the front office. And something that comes up and surprises people often is, we often recommend a SaaS option for order management or fulfillment. And after getting customers' requirements, you realize that, hey, you're probably not going to outdo your nearest competitor by doing orders better. I mean, you have to have orders, but to differentiate the business, should you focus on that or the customer's experience in the store and online and mobile and tablet? And so we see, I think there's a lot of good fits for that. We've got a customer on the East Coast, big fashion brand, interestingly enough, who was with a major SaaS provider for commerce for years. And what inevitably happened is, believe it or not, the SaaS isn't completely magical, although I think we all want it to be. And they still had to schedule large events to make sure there was capacity with said provider. They also got to a point where they were trying to further differentiate themselves from other fashion brands, and this is in the clothing sector, fashion, I should say. And they got to a point where they needed the core platform modified to accommodate some of their requirements. Right? They're trying to provide a unique experience that didn't exist in the platform. And since they were using a SaaS platform, they weren't able to just go completely customize it. Well, they did get those requests in, and then they were released to the platform, and lo and behold, now everybody in the fashion industry who's using that platform has access to these features. So, that is an example of what ended up happening there. Is that particular customer ended up migrating to, I think, Oracle A2G in this case, but it could be equally applied for Hybris or Magento or another platform. So in that case, the differentiator for them was creating what they were deeming a special experience that kind of brought together public web, tablet, and when you walked in the store, identifying Internet of Things, beacons, identifying the customer. A lot of that's really hard to do, but they had a very impressive kind of path on this, and they weren't able to do it. So they decided to pull back and go in-house. But that same customer is using a SaaS for order management all day long.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not that differentiating.
Excellent. The other thing to think about is just the extended capabilities that this allows. We kind of alluded this at the beginning, but one of the real, I think, game changers from an internal perspective, using with the Rack, has been our ability to offer a truly multi-cloud solutions. And what we've been able to do is create an IaaS, infrastructure as a service, or a platform as a service, around multiple clouds. And what we're finding is that, boy, certain clouds are really great at certain things, and that it's not a one-size-fits-all. We've kind of talked about that. And what we're finding is that AWS and Google have just mastered monitoring, and they're all compliant, and they have all their compliance and security capabilities all built in. And so when you get them started up, your engineers and your technology teams can start acting quicker and faster in what they're developing. But I just think it allows us to iterate quicker as we do POCs and or learnings. But then there's also just stability across all of the different systems. It also has been shifting how we do operations. We, within Rack, our operations budget, our mandatory and kind of run the business budget, when I first got here, was very, very high. And over the years, we have just seen that reduce more and more as we have started introducing more automation. And where we're leveraging our technology and our clouds to do the heavy lifting for us, so that then the team is actually focusing on the quality of the service that we're providing, faster SLAs. And then the other thing we're seeing is, as we're starting to do that, our customers are actually wanting access to that. And so we're now working on building public-facing APIs, because they want to join to some of these legacy systems, because that data is really important for the businesses. And that's not just that's Rackspace's customers, but that's also our BUs, where they're saying, I want to see the topography, I want to see your capacity planning. And so how do we enable that and bring self-service to them? But it's merging some of our old assets or our internal assets with our external-facing customer base. And so it's a very exciting kind of opportunity that we have. And then when you start getting into AI and the digital initiatives that we're doing, the big learning for there is, and probably nobody on the phone would be surprised by this, but bad data in, bad data out. So it doesn't matter what artificial intelligence you put on top of that. If the data's bad, you're going to get an output. And that's been a focus of ours for the last year, is how do we clean that data up so that then the insights that we are rolling out and giving is enabling a fanatical experience.
Yeah, I think a real-world example that I can think of recently is, we've got partners, like I think Ryan mentioned earlier, Amazon as well as Google, and of course Azure. And when we sought out to build the Adobe Experience, the Managed Cloud for Adobe Experience Manager product, which is taking something that normally takes 5 to 6 weeks end to end just to deploy, and then 3 to 5 days to do any major changes. These are big monolithic environments. We've got that down to about an hour now with a lot of engineering effort. And that offering, we chose to build it on AWS. Mm-hmm. It's completely managed by Rackspace, completely ran on AWS. Yep. Because it made sense. The technologies that particular application required were a better fit for that cloud. Mm-hmm. We've got another product for Sitecore. Mm-hmm. When we ran through the requirements and what the platform looks like and the partnerships, it was an absolutely slam dunk for Azure PaaS. Mm-hmm. And if we had built that on AWS, just to kind of mirror what we've already done on AWS, it would have taken substantially longer. I think we're 8 months in right now. I guarantee it would have taken twice that. And so we're getting to a point now where now that we've done all the hard work, the Azure PaaS capabilities allow that product to kind of scale up and down. And it's something that it would have been a hell of a lot harder to accomplish on AWS.
Absolutely. I think one of the last things we just wanted to call out, we've kind of iterated in our kind of some of the prior discussions here, but is really around driving efficiency. And the one thing I just want to call it is that from an IT lens, one of the biggest learning that I've had is you truly have to dedicate and allocate a budget for this, right? Otherwise, it's just going to get utilized and used up in other problems and systems. And once you have that allocated, you're actually able to really drive that speed of change quicker. The other thing is that as you create these service layers and these API layers, you reduce the rogue IT, because you've built standards and you've built enablement engineering tenets that if everybody in the company follows, then it makes it a lot easier at a lower cost to assume some applications that may have been built, as long as they follow those standards, that you can bring into the IT organization, and then you can operate it a lot easier and faster.
An example that we talked about earlier is again, allowing business owners to come in, spin up their own cloud.
That's right.
As long as they follow a pattern for tagging, and you can recognize the calls later. Yeah,
that's right. We'll go to the next slide real quick. And then again, just kind of building on this and just summarizing what we're talking about is again, the idea here is that if we do this, we can actually execute IT projects faster, right? You remove a lot of the complexity and the effort and the risk associated, but you actually are boosting a return on investment. And as part of our business case analysis for every program and project that comes into us as we allocate it to a project, we hold very stringent KPIs to measure our success. And I can tell you that in the 3 years I've been here, we've moved from a 9-month to almost 2 years in large deployments and getting them out through the system to we're iterating and learning on a very agile basis, on a weekly basis, quite frankly. But it's allowing for continuous deployment, continuous improvement, capabilities that is really starting to help change the game and allowing us to iterate faster. So let's start today. Well, not so fast. So second, the biggest challenge that we have found here is that we do it alone, and I just appreciate these sessions so much, because what it does is we're not alone in this, and I hope these stories and these examples that Brandon and I have given you have shown you that you're not alone, that we're all going through this together, and we're here to help. And particularly, Brandon and I are excited to share this journey, but also learn from you as well. So let's see if we have any questions.
We do have a question from the audience surrounding some servers from, let's see, I'm trying to summarize this. So the more we move to the cloud, the larger the effects of this seems to impact end users, in addition to security concerns surrounding hosting assets in the cloud. So what insights do you have that could help put our minds at ease when considering cloud solutions?
Yeah, we see this a lot, particularly SMB, lower mid-market, where I think we kind of hit on it earlier. Originally, the definition of success was move to the magical public cloud.
Right.
And that truly can be success. It is quite a venture if you have to move an existing workload. But Seth, as you pointed out here, like trying to maintain HA effectively means you need 3 regions. Right, you need not just multi-AZ if you're using AWS lingo, because that's still one region. Multiple data centers, one region. They recently had an outage, right?
That's right.
You really have to go multi-geo, and that's not necessarily native to the cloud. So you can use native HA capabilities to give you, say, 99.95, 99.9, which they're doing pretty good these days doing that. But if you're trying to get near 100, right, the more nines you want to add on there, 99.9999 especially. You're talking about at least 2 regions, if not 3. And so there's definitely a price point where, as you've kind of called out here, where sometimes it just makes sense to stay private cloud. Sure, you're in one region. You can easily go HA with, like, for example, our VMware offering, HA as a service, 2 regions. I think our uptime there is substantially better than the average public cloud. On the flip side, at some point in scale, I'll give you an example. We tend to see when businesses are kind of doing $100 million or more online, public cloud starts to flip over and become more interesting. Because at that point, you're able to roll out and load balance that traffic to multiple regions, therefore using it all. It's not just an HA, it's standby. And so it starts to kind of take over. So there isn't really a one-size-fits-all. It depends on the application. It depends on where your customers are. It depends on if you have data sovereignty in countries like Germany, right? Because you have to do HA within the country versus just HA. Where your CDNs are. It's a very complex answer, unfortunately. But those are the types of things that I think that Rackspace can help with. We've been there, we've done that.
Absolutely.
We bled a bit, we learned a lot. We can certainly help you apply those.
Excellent.
I think we have time for a few more questions, if there are any. Just while we're waiting for additional questions, just a reminder that there will be a handout download available after the call that everybody that's listening will get. It's a readiness checklist, which you can use to kind of jumpstart this initiative in-house and or bring it to partners and at least know kind of what questions to start asking.
On your screen, you can actually see a few of the questions that will be addressed in the handout that will be emailed to you after this webinar.
Looks like we have one that is related to moving, so cloud transformation, kind of how, basically it's how do you pick AWS, Azure, or private cloud? And I think we kind of hit on this in the last question, but it really depends on the application.
That's right.
It depends. I mean, every cloud now, it used to be that if you rewind, I'd say 4 years ago, public clouds sort of looked like bigger private clouds. They were just compute, they were disk, and there were some flavors of that.
That's right.
Today's clouds, Google, IoT, awesome, right? AI capabilities, I think they're all getting very, very strong, but Google's very strong. If you're looking for, redundant, SAN type storage for your media assets, AWS has an amazing solution that, believe it or not, we've used it to save $500 to $1,000 per environment because we don't have to go build a DIY, compute for storage now. They've got it as a service.
That's right.
There's also, I think, the trend we're seeing more so for cloud native applications is, function calls. It's software like Lambda, right, where you actually pay per call versus paying for time.
Yep.
And so again, that is starting to be more cloud specific, and so it depends on what type of shop you are, if you're going to be able to take advantage of those functions and calls, or whether you need more raw compute. I think it's just going to depend. And sometimes, frankly, don't rule out dedicated servers, don't rule out private cloud. There's definitely inflection points in there where, to start with, they can be a little more expensive, depending if you want to be HA or not.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, remember that your typical quote for dedicated or private cloud is going to include terabytes of bandwidth. It's going to include redundant storage. It's going to include backups. So be sure to add those things up when you're looking at public cloud alternatives. Absolutely.
All right. Well, again, I want to just remind you all of your next steps. So please check your email for the readiness handout and to feel free to review and complete it. And then reach out to our ITD specialist to discuss it and help you chart a path forward. Brandon, thank you for making the time. And again, we're really excited to have gotten to share this with you, and we hope you have found it as valuable as we have. And again, please don't hesitate to ask questions. You're not on this journey alone. And thank you.
I think we have one more question. We're going to take one more. Do you have any recommendations for addressing cloud LAN latency when considering a move from local storage to public cloud? Yes, buy larger instances, buy them in the same region. So you're going to have to, one of the things we had to do in one of our products, AEM in particular, was really use the APIs of the software to adjust for latency. I'll give you an example. Magento. So we created a version of Managed Cloud for Magento in our public cloud a few years ago, and we used hybrid. Well, when you went from public cloud to the back private cloud for your storage, the latency, we had it down to, I think, 3 gig pipe, 2.5 milliseconds, additional to your normal latency. So it's basically adding 2.5 milliseconds. What we found out was the average Magento site did about 700 calls before it rendered a page. Wow. And so net effect is some of the worst case page loads increased by 2 to 3 seconds. So they were going from a normal of 2.2 to 4, 5, 6 seconds. And so we had to really re-architect the way we did storage, we had to start considering things like under 3 millisecond latency. And the new standard for us was basically plus or minus a millisecond and a half. But it depends on the application. Some applications aren't latency sensitive, and the best advice there is obviously, use bigger compute instances because you're going to get more dedicated networking. You're going to get, for example, 10 gig networking versus just shared 1 gig. That makes a substantial difference, particularly when you've got a lot of traffic. Well, I enjoyed it. Thank you, Ryan.
No, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, everybody, for attending.